Hey guys, this is Nia and today I will be starting the Christmas themed videos as I know that a lot of you like to make your own cards and DIYs for Christmas. So today I will be starting with a collection of these mini cards with different types of pine leaves. These are super easy to do and they're a good exercise to practice your brush control. So let's begin by drawing out the first one. I'm starting with the easiest one, and for this one I'm going to make a silhouette of the leaf look like half a circle or like a mushroom cap, and I'm going to draw out lines. You can make the leaves look more wispy by including more curvy lines or more stiff by drawing out straight lines with less curves. For the leaves, I'm only drawing it out on the top side and leaving the bottom stem completely empty. The colors that I'm going to be using for this is sap green, ultramarine deep, and burnt sienna for the leaves. If you want to lighten the leaves, however, you can also add a bit of permanent yellow deep. But I want my leaves to be quite dark in color, so these are the colors that I'm going to be using all throughout. Then for the berries, I'm going to mix in Crimson Lake and Naphtha Red together. I'm also going to be using my Finetech Gold palette for the borders of the shapes. And to create different tones, I'm going to add some Quin Red into the gold and also some of the Crimson Lake. You can also substitute with Quin Opera if you want the gold to be a bit more of a lighter pink. I'm going to start out by mixing the colors. I like to put the colors that I'm going to mix in on my palette, so I first take some burnt sienna. Then on a separate area, I'm going to place a mix of ultramarine deep and sap green, and then next to it, I'm just going to put some sap green by itself, and I can just mix in whatever I need between those colors, and I can change up the ratios when I want to. With this mini card, I decided to paint them inside of different basic shapes. So the first one, I use a triangle for the border, but you can also paint this fully on a mini card too without the shapes if you would like to. I just feel like the shapes make it look a little bit modern in terms of style. To paint the leaves, I first used a mixture of the burnt sienna that I had on my palette with a dark green mixture with the ultramarine deep mixed into it, and I used this to paint the stem. And then I clean my brush and mix in some of the dark green mix with the sap green for the leaves. For this, I'm using my size 0 brush. The smaller your brush is, the finer you can make your leaves. And it's also a good chance for you to exercise painting thin lines, because you do want to try to make the lines as even and as thin as possible for this. It's also okay to mix in different tones of green because the mixture on your brush might have more burnt sienna or more sap green. As long as the colors are made with that limited palette, the colors will still look good together, but I do try to make the stem look more brown compared to the leafy part. For the berries, I'm going to mix the colors Crimson Lake and Naphtha Red together to get a rich dark red color, and I'm going to just paint circles with white highlights on the side, and I'm just going to distribute them around some of the empty spaces. For the second pine leaf, I'm going to draw out a longer version of the first one, and I'm going to start out with a longer stem. Then the lines for the leaves are going to be placed on either side, running from the top to bottom part of the stem, but I'm going to leave a small part of the stem still. You can make the leaves more stiff or wispy for this one too by changing the curvature of each line as well as where the lines are facing. I'm going to make a similar type as the first one, so for the leaves I'm going to have the lines facing outwards, more opened up, instead of it being closer to the stem. So as you can tell, the second one that I drew out, the leaves have more of curvature going inwards, whereas the one that I'm drawing right now have more of straight lines facing outwards. For the colors, I'm just going to do the same thing as before by making the main stem brown with the dark green leaves. And now I'm going to paint it like how I drew them out before. And for the border for this one, I decided to draw out a teardrop shape. This is the easy thing about this painting. We're actually just making one type of stroke with the brush and repeating it, but by repeating it with a slight difference and by making the stem longer or branching out, we can create all sorts of different pine leaves. You can also create your own leaf shape for this one if you have any ideas, or use different shapes as I did for the borders. A tip though is to spend more time drawing the borders out, because to create that modern feel you do want to create really clean lines. So I really took my time in making sure that the lines are as clean and as symmetrical as I can get it to be. The size of these cards may vary depending on how large or small you want to paint them. I'd say just adjust with the brush size that you have. If you don't have a tiny brush like this one, your lines might be a little bit thicker, so you can use a larger piece of paper for the card. Personally, I just cut it out blindly thinking of the size that I like, so the size is a bit weird, but if you would like to make them exactly the same as mine, the size is 87 millimeters by 58 millimeters. To finish the painting off, I'm going to paint the berries again using the same red mix, and I'm going to distribute them the same way as I did with the previous one. Moving on to the third pine leaf, I'm going to make this one a wispy version of the previous pine leaf that we painted, but this time I'm also going to group them branching out. I think a group of 2 or 3 would look nice, and you can also play with the lengths of the stem and the lines for the leaves. Because of the grouping, the space might be a little bit difficult to place, so you can mix it with individual ones too. So if you have a spare space that is left and it's a little bit awkward and it wouldn't fit a group of them, you can just fill it with one of the leaves, or if it's even smaller, you can fill it with a group of 3 berries. The border that I created with this one is a square that I've rotated. You can also make just a square, but I thought it would look a little bit too dull, which is why I decided to rotate it. I also thought of making like a diamond shape, not as in the stone, but diamond in terms of cards. I think card shapes might also look interesting for this, like a spade and things like that. Anyway, I just painted this one like how I drew them out before. Like usual, I used the same colors, but I didn't make the stem a separate brown color, but instead I made the whole part of the leaf the same color this time. But I'm still varying the ratio, so not every single leaf look exactly the same. Then for the berries later on, I'm just going to do the exact same thing with the same colors. For the fourth and final pine leaf, I want to make this one branching out a little bit like a fern, so with the stem getting longer as it gets towards the bottom. But for the leaves, I'm not going to draw them as bushy as the other ones that I've painted, but I'm going to draw shorter leaves and only along the top area, so there's still a long stem that's branching out from the main middle stem. But you can also experiment and play around with the lengths and see what you like before painting them. Now I'm just going to paint it, and this time I'm just going to stick with one color just like the previous one. And as I paint, and this goes for all of the previous ones too, I like to randomize the rotation of where the leaf is facing so there's a nice natural flow to the composition. As you can probably see, I always draw out the branches first, then I fill them up with the leaves, but if I feel like a certain area is looking a little bit too empty, I always go back to it and fill in those places so it looks well balanced. And once I'm done with all of the paintings, I'm going to paint the borders now. And here I've got my Finetech Gold palette. They also have colorful versions of the palette, which has lots of different metallic hues. But considering I've only got the golds, I tried to vary them by adding different colors. So for the first one, I added Quin Red to the most yellow gold on the palette, and this creates more of a bronze or copper color. And still using the smallest brush that I have, I tried to paint it as even as possible. I'm also using more pressure to paint the border so I can get a thicker outline. For the next shape, I'm just going to color it as is, and here I'm using a light gold color just so there's a slight difference between the tones from the previous one. If you have the same Finetech Gold palette as I do, these paints can be quite opaque, but it does take a long time for the paint to activate to perform with that opacity. So to activate the paint, I try to use a larger brush to get more water on the palette, and I try to use my brush to activate the paint and then leave it for a while until the paint softens up a little bit, and then I mix it again with my brush to get a very thick consistency of the paint. However, if the paint that you've already placed down on paper looks a little bit runny, it's okay. You can build up the layer as you go, and this would also create a thicker opacity. For the next one, I used the same gold as before, as in the first one, and I added some Crimson Lake to create an even darker and richer gold color. You can experiment yourself with this. By just combining the gold with different tones of pinks and reds, you'll be able to create different tones of gold. You can also try mixing it with purple and other colors too. Then for the next and final one, I use the champagne color and my palette, then mix it with some Quin Red. You can also use Quin Opera for a lighter pink, but I decided to go with the darker pink. Then I added some of the yellow gold from the previous mix to create a little bit of a rose gold color. Not sure if the color shows well on camera, but if you put them next to each other, you'll see that there are different tones of gold. For the final accent, and this is optional but it's actually my favorite part, I'm going to use some PVA glue and dot some empty areas with the glue, and sometimes I also put some on the leaves too. It's really up to you how you want to distribute it. Then I use very small pieces of gold leaves and push it down into the glue, and I want the gold leaf to sort of break down and becomes like an accidental look, so the gold doesn't look like any particular shape. It's even okay if the gold leaf breaks down, leaving some white areas. I find that the gold leaves bring another dimension to the painting. Even though the Finetech Gold palette I find has a nice shimmer, the gold leaves bring more texture, and if you break it down, it even looks a little bit glittery from some angles, and I really like the look of it. I think it looks more festive this way, and I'm just going to apply this the same way for all of the cards. At any point when you clean out the excess gold leaf off and you feel like there's too little gold, you can always add more PVA glue on top of it, or next to the existing ones and add more gold leaves. But after applying the glue and putting the gold leaf, I'd like to leave it out a little bit just so the glue can settle and dry off and it doesn't pull off all of the gold leaf when you're trying to clean it out later on. For the finishing touch, I'm going to use a ruler to line the bottom part of the card where I'm going to write with pencil first, and I'm just going to write a simple Merry Christmas, but you can also write other things too if you would like. Then I'm going to use an Artliner to write over it. I wanted to do some lettering, but it seems like I have lost my brush pen, so I just wrote it with my usual waterproof Artliner, and the size that I use is 0.1. And then once I'm done writing all of the cards, I'm going to leave it out for a few seconds first before erasing it, just to make sure the ink is completely dry. And that's basically it for the tutorial. It's super simple, it's just a lot of repetitive steps, but the result I think looks quite satisfying, especially with the glittery texture from the gold leaves. I hope you guys enjoyed this one and learned something new. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram at ig_nyanyanny if you give this a go, to show me how your cards or Christmas tags turn out. Happy painting everyone, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!